Welcome to the Sons of Thunder. It's the show where we both pretend like we've read the latest chapter of Jordan Peterson's book. No, I'm just kidding. We both have read the chapter. And what we're doing right now is we're in the middle of a series that explains, from a Christian perspective, what Jordan Peterson's arguments are in his book, The 12 Rules for Life. And you know what we try to do is we try to analyze them from a Christian perspective. Is what he's saying biblical? Not only is it biblical, but is it something we should? Is it something that's needed right now? And how do we implement what he's advising us to implement, or should we at all? Quick introduction: if this is your first time watching, or if you're watching later or listening to the podcast, my name is Joel Sedecase.
And I'm Parker Sedecase.
That's actually Yosemite Sam. Yosemite Sam is a Looney Tunes character who is now gun free. He's now a pacifist. Have you heard about this?
Is that for real?
Yeah, the new iteration of Looney Tunes is not going to have any guns with Elmer Fudd or Yosemite Sam.
Wow.
They're not doing the guns.
That's their whole thing. That's their whole character was just guns.
Just shooting guns up in the air.
Yeah.
I know.
That and Elmer Fudd walking around with a
gun, trying to blow Bugs Bunny's head. Like, what's he going to do? Is he just... Because the whole point of the gun was to kill Bugs Bunny, right?
Yeah.
So is he just no longer trying to kill Bugs Bunny?
I don't know. I didn't know there's a new iteration, but that let's go off track. Did you hear about Nimrod? Did you know the word Nimrod when you call someone a Nimrod?
Yeah, of course.
Do you know the origin of that, or I think the origin from Looney Tunes?
Yes.
Isn't that insane?
Explain.
So, well, from what I've heard, we call each other Nimrod to say you're dumb, you're a dummy, whatever.
Yeah.
But as best as I can tell, that came from Bugs Bunny calling Elmer Fudd a Nimrod. Right. And he was saying it ironically because Nimrod was this mighty warrior from the Bible, mighty hunter from the Bible. And so he's going, okay, Nimrod, because he wasn't a good hunter. He was saying it ironically.
Right. It's like when you call a person you don't think is very smart Einstein.
Right. Exactly.
Oh, look at this Einstein.
Right. And so but just imagine our culture forgetting who Einstein was.
Right.
And then thinking that Einstein was a put down.
Right.
You know, like, oh, this guy's an idiot. He's an Einstein. You know, and I think that's what happened. And probably because of biblical illiteracy.
Yeah.
Right. It's just, I don't know what he means by Nimrod. Must be a put down. So yeah, I'm going to call Steve a Nimrod tomorrow. Which makes no sense. He's not trying to hunt. You're just completely out of context.
It's funny because it just goes to show you that Bugs Bunny has more biblical literacy than the average American.
Yeah, hilarious.
All right,
terrifying.
Yes, hilarifying.
Mm-hmm.
So let's do this, man. Enough pleasantries.
Yeah.
Let's go ahead and get into
rule number 6.
Rule number 6, and tell us what it is.
Yeah, set your house in perfect order before you criticize the world.
You know something? You know what I just realized?
No. You got a sweep or something? Your house isn't in order?
No, my house. I mean, look at my shelves. I think my house is in pretty good order. Now, don't look at my desk. I'm not going to show you that.
Yeah,
that's wretched. But I read this chapter like last week or earlier in the week, and for today, I actually read Rule 7. So I'm a rule ahead. So all those points I was making to you in our discussion before we got started.
There it is. That explains it.
I was like, because you were telling me, you're like, yeah, this is the problem of evil chapter. And I'm like, okay, I'm looking at it. I'm like, I don't see.
Oh, yeah. I was wondering what you were saying, dude. That's so funny.
Yeah,
Rule
that's
7,
why.
Pursue what is meaningful, not what is expedient. And it builds off itself a little bit. Peterson, like we've said again and again, is not the most systematic thinker. Mm-hmm. And he doesn't claim to be. I don't think he tries to be.
No.
But yeah, there is a little bit of progression going on throughout the rules. Yeah. That's so funny that you were looking at the wrong one.
Yeah, I was looking at Rule 7. So, but that's good though. I mean, I'm ready to go for Rule 6. And I think it's it's a fascinating chapter. There's a lot to affirm here. At one point I was reading and it actually gave me chills.
Yeah, dude.
Where he's talking about Cain and Abel. But let's go ahead and get into this. What introduce us to
so let's do
his argument.
Just a brief overview. This is maybe more than any other rule, Peterson's attempt at wrestling with the problem of evil. And the problem of evil is many Christian apologists, theologians, philosophers agree that the problem of evil is one of the most difficult problems in all of theology and philosophy. Anyone who believes in a God. And the problem of evil basically is, hey, if there is a God, if he's good, then why is there evil? Why is there so much bad stuff in the world? And you can frame that different ways. If God's all good, if he's all knowing, if he's all powerful, then he would know about all evil, right? He knows everything. He would know about any instance of evil before it happens. He would be powerful enough to stop it. And if he were all good, he would stop it because he's good and evil is bad. But we find evil in the world, so there must not be that kind of God. And it's not usually it's just, so there is no God. But really what the argument would show is that, at least put this way, one of those attributes of God is not correct. Either maybe he doesn't know about it, or maybe he's not powerful to stop it. So we'll talk about a Christian response to that. But
if that's the case, that's not the Christian God. The Christian God is
all-knowing. Yeah.
So to say all-knowing, to say God exists, but he's not all-knowing, hypothetically, is to say the God of the Bible doesn't exist.
Yeah. And there's some Christians who I would say are very mistaken, who say, God doesn't know the future, or things like that, open theism.
Right. Process theology, God is changing along with the world.
Certainly process theology cannot be Christian.
Right.
But some Christians I think they're confused, saying God doesn't know the future, and this is called open theism, openness theism. And some of them are philosophers, and they would eat my lunch and some of this stuff, but they fall outside the historic faith for sure.
Right. They might be able to answer a lot of questions better than you or me, you or I. But one question that they would get wrong, we would get right is the Bible actually true?
Yeah.
It's a very simple question, simple answer.
So this is Peterson. This is Peterson's attempt at dealing with the problem, not at solving the problem. He doesn't try to solve why there's evil or how we completely eradicate all evil, but he does put forth a proposal for how we might go about creating less evil.
When was the first time you heard someone interact with the question, why does God allow, or how could God have allowed someone like Hitler to exist?
I first dealt with this from Dad reading the Bible to us as kids, and we were reading about Pharaoh. And this is more has to do with God's sovereignty and evil. But I remember Dad reading us about Pharaoh, and Pharaoh is this wicked dude, and he's enslaving Jews, and he's terrible. And
technically, they were Hebrews at that point, not called Jews, but that's fine.
Yeah. Okay. Great. So
it's important, but that's okay.
Yeah. So he hardened his heart, and then later in the chapter it says God hardened Pharaoh's heart.
Right.
And I was not okay with that. And I said, Dad, what's the deal? It seemed like God made it impossible for Pharaoh to say, yes, I'll let your people go. And Pops just goes, well, God gave him more of what he wanted. I'm like, but no, it doesn't seem like that at all. And then I hid in my closet for the rest of the day because I was scared of God. So yeah, it's like,
which quite honestly, Jordan Peterson would say, that's a perfectly reasonable response.
Yeah, he would.
When faced with the magnitude of being or
itself,
or God in the ancient language.
Yeah, right. Yeah, Peterson often uses God language, and he is notoriously difficult to pin down on his beliefs in God. We talked about this again and again. But in this chapter, he seems to be talking about being, capital B, being, as God.
Very, who's the philosopher that says God is the ground of being? Who is that? He's sort of just outside.
Aquinas talks about that.
No. This is a guy who's just outside the bounds of orthodoxy. God is the ground of all being. Come on.
A lot of theologians say that.
There's one guy though.
Is he alive today?
I don't think so.
It's not David Bentley Hart or something like that.
No.
I'm not sure.
Okay.
Is it open? Are you talking about like process stuff, like
No. Okay, if you're
North Head,
if you're watching live,
Whitehead.
No,
North White Head.
in North Head.
North Head. North Face.
That's yeah, right. That's the guy who was a philosopher who sold polar fleeces in his at the back of his truck.
Yeah, yeah.
Hey, did you get that new North Head fleece?
That's
I
good.
did. If you know who I'm talking about, who's the guy? God is the ground of all being. I used to know more when I was classical
is it
apologist.
the guy who Netland studied with? Is that who you're thinking of?
I don't know. Who did Netland study with?
I'm trying to think now.
Maybe.
Yeah. Go ahead.
All right. So
now I've got it.
I remember.
I got his book over there.
I remember the first
Hick.
time.
Is it John Hick? Is that who you're thinking of?
No.
Okay.
No. John Hick is the religious pluralism guy.
Yeah.
Along with Robert McKim, I think. Okay. No. Here's the point. I remember the first time when someone addressed this with me. The first time I remember, I was in I want to say it was my New Testament class at Grove City College, and Dr. James Bibza was teaching. And I think this was my freshman year because it was a Christian college and we had to take certain religious classes, and Grove City is a great school. And Dr. Bibza was a great teacher.
Yeah.
And I believe man, you know me, I had my hand up. I was asking questions I was probably asking like 50 questions per class. I'm not exaggerating, and maybe like 20 questions per
You
class.
both got that from Pops.
Totally.
Yeah.
One of the questions that I asked was, how could God allow someone like Hitler to live and to come to power? And what he said was so profound, Dr. Bibson. You could tell he had heard the question before. He said, a better question to ask is, given what we know about human nature, how is it that God restrains the inner Hitler in more people? Like, how is it that more people don't arrive at that kind of position of great evil?
Yeah.
It's like, and at that point, dude, I didn't know about Calvinism, total depravity. I didn't really understand. This is a Presbyterian school, right? So I didn't understand where he was coming from. Presbyterians, of course, are Calvinists, at least if they're consistent. And so now I look back on it and I go, right. And I think that's what Jordan Peterson is getting at here without so much of the overt theological orthodox language. What he's saying is, look, it's the old Alexander Solzhenitsyn quote. The guy who wrote the Gulag Archipelago, who survived all those Russian gulags, came to the West and exposed it to the world. He said, the dividing line between good and evil runs straight through the human heart.
Yeah, so good.
And that, I think that's what Dr. Bibza was talking about. I think that's what Jordan Peterson's talking about. I think Francis Schaeffer talks about that. The source of evil is within our own heart. The question is not, how does God let Hitler come to power? The question is, why hasn't God let you come to power?
Yeah.
You're nefarious.
Yeah. And so theologians talk about this as common grace, right? That's an aspect of common grace, that God is restraining the evil. And it goes along nicely with the doctrine of total depravity, that every part of every person is infected by sin. But everyone's not a serial killer. And a big part of that is because God is restraining evil in the world. And if he were to let go of that, then we, like to quote a famous thinker, we'd all be slashing each other in the streets.
Do you want to give some context to that?
Yeah, that's my brother Joel. Talking about what he would do.
Wait, no.
What he wants to do.
No.
As soon.
No. Look, if you're going to tell the story, tell it right. I remember telling Elisa, this is years ago, I said, thank God that there are laws. We were talking about common grace.
Yeah. And
how God restrains evil in the world. It's a conversation very similar to this. Elisa and I are always having conversations like that. She's quite the thinker, I might say. But one of the things that I said was, I go, man, thank God that there are these good laws on the books. Like, murder is against the law. If murder was not against the law, we'd all be out in the streets slashing each other. And I'm thinking, like, that's an obvious proposition. Like, that, of course, that's what would happen.
Yeah.
And I kind of move on. I look back over and she's looking at me like, I'm like, what? She's like, that's what you'd be doing if murder was against the law? You'd just be out slashing everybody. And I'm I'm like,
Yeah.
oh, I never thought of it that way. Like
Pretty
that's not,
depraved.
that's kind of a normal thing, I thought, but no, I
Yeah.
guess not.
Yeah.
Um,
So that's very Petersonian. I think that was good of you to notice that. And I think he probably does get that from Solzhenitsyn, from um, who else? Nietzsche and some of these guys, right? Like it's funny because he talks about the Bible a
Tolstoy.
lot, but he's not getting it from the Bible. I mean, he quotes he talks about Cain and Abel, and he loves that story, and he talks about that at length. But his view of sin is kind of weird, and we can get into that as well.
Yeah.
But yeah,
Well,
it's within all of us, and I think he talked about this in the last rule as well. It's not the question of people doing drugs like cocaine is not the question.
like
Why
why does anyone do drugs?
Right. It's not that. It's why doesn't everyone do drugs at every moment all the time? And so the same thing. Why is there evil in the world? And what Peterson is getting at is why isn't there more evil? Why isn't
Right.
there just unrestrained?
Mhm.
Why is there any good
Yeah.
in the world?
Yeah, and just to clarify, because I have some people who watch content that I put out there just to find me saying something wrong. I was not saying that I would love to go out and kill people in the streets. What I was saying is that there are enough people who, given enough anger, given enough inciting incidents, would do exactly that if there were no restraining societal bounds.
Yeah, yeah, and it's not just the laws either. It's it's written on our hearts, right?
Yeah,
And then it's
conscience.
also inculcated by our parents. It's also
Mhm.
inculcated by our families,
Right.
more generally by society, by church. And so, if you didn't have those other restraints going on the human level, right? Those
Yeah.
different spheres of sovereignty influencing you, and it was just you and no rules, then yeah, dude, who knows what it'd be
Right.
insane, right?
So I'm curious to know, you folks who are watching this live. This is one of the beautiful benefits of watching live. Drop a comment below. We get comments, we can read them, and we'll respond to them in real time as long as they're clean. All right. Every now and then somebody tries to drop one that tries to get me to read something inappropriate in another language, but we see through that. So don't do that. And you know, Park, by the time we get to the end of this episode, I want to talk about what I see as a fatal flaw in Peterson's solution to the problem of
Yeah.
evil. But first, he starts out with these examples, just like, my example of everybody slashing each other in the streets.
Right.
That's kind of humorous, but in reality, in the real world, there are actual examples in the real world of people who take up that ethos, and
Mhm.
they say, well, look at what he cites. One of the members of the Columbine duo.
Yeah.
And Perk, were you alive when that happened?
I'm not sure if I was alive or not.
I think you were.
I remember
You were young.
hearing about it, but I remember watching videos at like Super Bowl stuff. Right? Do you remember like Super Bowl halftime shows? There would be like evangelism outreaches. Do you remember that? Our church
Dude, I
would do
don't think
that?
we're talking about the same thing.
And there was like a Columbine video
Oh,
that
really?
we'd watch. Yeah.
You mean we would go to church outreach
We
Super
would
Bowl
go to
parties,
yeah,
and
and
they
I
would have
think
a
at the halftime, so the halftime show, they would show like an outreach video.
oh,
I
right,
think it
right.
was about like Columbine. I think they played
Okay.
that several years in
Yeah.
a row.
So you were around, because I remember, I think I was in high school. You were probably in third grade or something like that. But maybe like a little too young to fully know what's going on. But I mean, those guys who shot up that school in Columbine, which was the first major high profile school shooting like that I can recall, or even mass shooting.
Mhm.
I mean, these guys were deeply cynical. They were motivated by a kind of deep, dark, satanic level of evil that is almost difficult to comprehend. Except here's the thing. Okay, so when you open up the chapter and you read on page 148.
Hmm.
Now this is part of the manifesto of one of these school shooters. He says, if you recall your history, the Nazis came up with a, quote, final solution, end quote, to the Jewish problem. Kill them all. Well, in case you haven't figured it out, I say, quote, kill mankind, all caps, end quote. No one should survive.
Yeah.
Now, dude, these that's such a deep level of nihilistic evil, it's difficult to wrap your head around that kind of darkness until you sort of wind it back into some of its less extreme forms.
Yeah.
Okay, wind it back and think about some of the messaging that's out there. Haven't you ever heard someone say something like this? Mankind is a virus in the world. Mankind is a blight upon nature. Have
Yeah,
you
I heard that from Mr. Smith in The Matrix. Do you remember that?
Well,
Do you
yeah,
remember
yeah.
that? Yeah.
That's right. That's right.
Disease.
That's
Yeah.
that's exactly.
But also and actually Peterson brings this to light. The a lot of like neo-environmentalists, right? Where it's like, we are the problem, we're the sickness. And it came out a little bit during COVID, right? Like the nature is healing kind of stuff. And a lot of that is really actually commendable. And you're like, wow, dude, we need to actually clean up. If at just a couple of weeks and nature comes back, like, yeah, we're doing something wrong. But then other people are like, good, hope it takes us all. It's like, ooh, that is against being itself, right? Like
right.
kind of jacked up.
Yeah, and it's a very anti-Christian view, and you even see this in the first in Infinity War, not the sequel, but in Infinity War, not Endgame, but when Thanos is saying the universe is overpopulated, people can't thrive. In other words, if you want to make the world a better place, kill half of its beings.
Yeah. Well, dude, again, we are both too young for this, but I think in the 70s or maybe the 60s, they were talking about overpopulation and food shortage and how we're going to have limitations on the number of babies born. Do you remember hearing anything about that?
Wait, say it again. I'm sorry. I was reading the comments. Okay, if you're commenting, we will address that because I'm loving these comments that are coming in. Can you repeat what you just said? I think I caught it, but
I think it was in the 70s or the 60s, maybe earlier, but they were having debates on population size and how Earth is not going to be able to sustain this number of people, the rate at which we're growing. And
yeah,
do you remember hearing about that?
Oh yeah, dude. And that's been an ongoing discussion for at least 100 years. Thomas Malthus have you heard of Thomas Malthus? He's
just vaguely.
Okay. He was, I don't know when he was, 1840s. I don't know. Someone can correct me on that. Maybe I might be way off on that. But he was the one who basically said, eventually the world will run out of resources. And here's the thing though, too. With that whole worldview, there's a lot of jingoistic racial superiority stuff that comes in. It's always those unwashed people who live on the other continent that needs to, they're having too many kids.
Yeah.
And unlike us, pure Westerners or Europeans, it's very, very, there's this racist ideology that comes along with it.
Totally.
So now, here's the crazy thing. Now our society has largely rejected that kind of racism. I'm not going to say we've rejected all racism, but we've kept a lot of that anti-human sentiment.
Yeah.
And we've just now expanded it out to everybody. Now everyone is the problem. It's very much like what this guy from Columbine was saying. It's not just kill one ethnicity, it's kill them all.
Yeah. There's a difference I've found between that is between Columbine, just anti-human in general, and some of the neo-environmentalism is there's very little that I can agree with the Columbine guy, right? It's like, no, dude, that's satanic. That's self-referential. You
pure
just
evil
on, like an ingrown hair. You just turned in on yourself, and you're just putrefying. With some of the other anti-human perspectives out there, it's like, dude, your conclusions are reprehensible. I can see why you got there, right? So with animals, and you see, you watch a documentary about chickens' beaks being burned off so they can be crammed and stuff, and it's like that hits the imago Dei in us that's called to care for nature,
right?
And we see that and we go, no, that's wrong.
That's wrong.
No, that we should not be doing that to animals. And just thinking of someone stuffing their face with fried chicken, and you're like, dude, no, that's not right. And you can say, that's right, I can affirm that in you. But the answer is not to destroy all humans after that, right? Because then you're messing up the order of being, that humans are up here, animals are down here. That means we should be caring for them. So that just a little difference between, well, I guess a huge difference between that and the Columbine, I'm going to kill everyone satanic idea.
Yeah.
Also, later he continues to quote from them, or maybe it's the same guy's manifesto, but he talks about just this no ability for grace, no ability for forgiveness, he says, if you've wronged me or pissed me off or whatever in the past, and I see you, you're not going to live any longer. And it's like this. I've been wronged, and so I'm going to wrong others.
Yes. Now, let's go back to the common grace thing here, because on page 149, he makes no. Let's see, 153. He makes this really profound point. As a psychologist, I think it carries a lot of weight. Jordan Peterson, of course, being a clinical psychologist, he says many, perhaps even most of the adults who abuse children were abused themselves as children. However, the majority of people who were abused as children do not abuse their own children. This is a well-established fact, which can be demonstrated simply arithmetically in this way. And then what he goes on to say is this. He says, if one parent abused 3 kids and then those parents abuse their kids, then eventually there will be more abusers in the world than there are people. Just arithmetically, it doesn't make sense. So what that entails then is that most people who are abused don't abuse, although most abusers were abused.
Right.
So, we've got to keep our category straight here.
Yep.
But again, that's common grace. And that's not, by the way, that's not the same thing as morality or as a cleanness of heart.
Yeah.
Because as Christians, and we do need to get to this, but as Christians, we look at righting wrongs not only as stopping sinning. Like, okay, I'm no longer sinning in that particular way anymore. Okay. Right. But it's a full cleansing of the whole person. We're actually new creations.
Well, in that
2 Corinthians 5:17 says, if you're in Christ, you're a new creature.
And along with that, the history matters. And so it's not just, oh, well, that's in the past, right? Like I'm a different
I did that
person
years
now.
ago. Time somehow absolves me of that.
There's no absolution without all sorts of stuff, without justice, without, forgiveness. It's not just, oh, it's yesterday.
Well, there has to be recompense, doesn't there? The wages of sin is death.
Yeah. And different sins require, so between God and man, you need forgiveness from God. Between man and man, there's all sorts of different things. Maybe it is making up by turning yourself in for a crime you did, or returning something you stole, or you know what I mean? All sorts of apologizing, right? Yeah.
Yeah. So he does talk about Cain and Abel on page 152. He talks about how Cain's jealousy of Abel, who Abel was really Cain's ideal. Abel brought the sacrifice to God and God accepted it. Cain's sacrifice was not accepted, which, by the way, quick recommendation. There's this band called Flatfoot 56. Someone referenced it on Facebook a while back to me, and I've been listening to. They've got this song called Cain. It's really a good song. Flatfoot 56 is like this. It's like this Irish. I think it's a Chicago-based Irish punk band. So kind of like a Dropkick Murphys kind of thing, if you remember those guys.
Yeah.
But they're Christians. So they've got this really raucous version of Amazing Grace with bagpipes and stuff.
Yeah.
But their song Cain is really, really good. It's like this really visceral, like, why'd you do it, Cain? But Jordan Peterson really, he talks about how Cain's revenge was based on jealousy of his successful brother, but he destroys Abel primarily to spite God. Now, here's the thing, dude. This is where I look at some of these really dark stories. Now, there's the extreme ones where it's like, oh, I don't even want to think about the fact that exists, right?
Yeah.
But isn't there a way, even in our popular entertainment, where the darkness is mixed in with just enough justification, enough sense of like we've got this sense of justice, right? But we do have this fallen sense of wanting revenge. Yeah. And it's like you can mix those two together enough to create a TV show that's very compelling. And one of the examples for that, for me, was the show The Man in the High Castle.
Oh yeah, okay.
You ever see it?
I'm so glad you brought that up because I wanted to talk about Philip K. Dick. I actually thought it was kind of boring. I'll have to do it again. I
stopped watching after like season 2 or 3, but
yeah. I actually started reading the book last night. That's so funny that I thought the book was a little bit boring too, so I put that down. But I started it back up last night. But go ahead, yeah, because I got some Philip K. Dick that I wanted to talk about as well.
Well, so what you know in that I haven't read the book, but in the series, the TV show, the world that's created by the Nazis and the imperialist Japanese
Yeah,
is so incredibly dark. It is so incredibly twisted that the people who are the people who are rebelling against them are entering into the darkness, but they themselves are it's hard to see how they themselves are not being consumed by the darkness.
yeah,
You know what I'm saying?
yeah, totally.
And here's the thing: the world outside, Park, is dark enough, right? Now, in that show, you hope, and I haven't gotten to the end of it, but it's like you hope that the machinations of the good guys, even as they sort of delve into the darkness themselves, you hope that there's going to be a redemption at the end, that the evil Nazis, the evil Japanese
Yeah,
imperialists are going to be destroyed. But the problem is along the way, you yourself are entering into this dark world. You're entering into this story, and
and your heroes are being corrupted as well. Is that?
your heroes are being corrupted, and it's like the sense that I got, and one of the reasons I ultimately stopped watching it was this: is I found myself being entertained, not approving of, but sort of passively taking in all of it,
Yeah,
all of it. Like I was finding myself. It was as if a show like that or a book like that, if done rightly, can can do a good job of metaphorically presenting the dark world. Kind of like this is like what Narnia does, where it's it's always winter, but it's never Christmas. That's such a great metaphor
oh,
for
so
life
good.
without God.
Yeah,
You know what I mean? But
yeah,
but in that story, Aslan comes and there's a thaw,
yeah.
and there's redemption, and there's goodness, and there are some heroes who are not tainted by the darkness.
Hmm.
But in this Man in the High Castle story, there was no thaw.
Yeah,
It was like we've got to become just as icy
yeah.
as the queen.
Well,
And I didn't like that. I felt like I was adding more darkness to my
no.
already dark environment.
I think a really interesting thing about stories is you have so what Peterson talks about uh, uh, often. He says he took this time to reflect on himself and see that he could have been a Nazi himself, not because he hates Jews or anything like that, but just saying if I were in that situation, if I were raised in that way, yeah, it might have been me too.
Mm.
And if you can't say that about yourself, you don't really understand the human
You
condition.
don't understand the depth of your own
And
depravity.
and that's what a good show will do to not to say hey, let's invite you into enjoying the bad guy and rooting
Yeah,
for the bad guy, but saying
yeah,
the bad guy could be you as well. So
right.
it's not giving him license. So you go, oh, I could do that too. But being like, oh crap, that could be me too.
Yeah,
Right. So it's not any kind of license, but showing
yeah,
that line does run right through the human heart, through
yeah.
your heart. That's what a good show does. And I think maybe Breaking Bad does that a little bit better, where
I've
you're
heard
you're not
that.
where you're not really rooting for Walter White. Some people do, and it's like, dude, you're not getting the show you know
Right.
but it's like, oh man, I see how he's breaking bad, how he's
Mm.
the circumstances, and each one of his responses to different circumstances, he made the wrong response. He kept on making the wrong response, and at the end he's this hardened, completely different person.
Yeah. And taking it back to the Avengers Infinity War, how many people when they heard Thanos' justification for killing half
Ooh,
the population, how many people
yeah, dude, seriously.
seriously
Yeah,
said, you know what? Thanos kind of has a
yeah,
point. Why
yeah,
do I find myself agreeing with
yeah,
Thanos? Well, it's like, you know what? I'll tell you why. Because your heart is depraved,
yeah,
and it's taking a Marvel movie to draw that out.
yeah.
If you think that Thanos has a good point, then congratulations, you're one step closer to realizing the depth of your own sinful heart and
Yeah.
your need for a savior.
And that
So,
you could be Thanos, dude. That's the
right,
bet. His
if you
name is
had that kind
Thanos.
of power, you would
Right.
be just the same.
Right. So, I just got done reading. I've been on a huge Philip K. Dick kick this summer, and just started. I just got done reading Ubik. Have you heard of Ubik?
No.
It's short for ubiquitous, and it's kind of like it's creepy and weird, and it's like The Matrix a little bit, but it's written in the 70s.
By the way, everyone watching, we're going to answer your questions right after this.
So he talks about these two forces. Basically, it's Ubik is like the good positive force, and he's got this really blasphemous line at the end where he quotes basically quotes John 1, but puts Ubik in the place of Jesus. But what he's showing is like there's this universal good and there's this universal corrupting nature. And Peterson talks about this when he's quoting Faust or Mephistopheles from stuff
from
Faust.
Faustus, yeah.
And well, let me read the quote from Faust. Mephistopheles says, "I am the spirit who negates, and rightly so, for all that comes to be deserves to perish wretchedly." And that's what this Jory character in Ubik, he's sucking the life out of things. And Ubik is coming along to fight Jory. And there's this eternal battle, and it takes place in these guys are in Cold Pack. They're in they're like half dead. And they're frozen, so they're in like dream states, but you can come talk to them. You go down to the mortuarium and you can talk to them, and it's really crazy. But in there, this 13-year-old kid is like sucking power from all the people in Half-Life. And his name is Jory, but he represents this universal principle.
So the evil villain is a 13-year-old kid?
Yeah. And he negates, that he corrupts, and it's this universal corrupting matter. And it's all throughout all of Philip K. Dick's books. Actually, the reason that you're not finding heroes in that story is because they're probably being true to Philip K. Dick. He doesn't write heroes. None of his stories has heroes in it.
That's so sad.
It's just a dystopian. All of them are dystopian, and they're crazy. But so this universal principle fighting, and Peterson talks about that really well, kind of because he's like this metaphysical dualist, right? We talked about the yin and the yang. So we don't believe that, but we're downstream.
We don't believe that good and evil are two equal and opposite forces.
No, of course.
Right, because we believe good is God's nature, and evil is an aberration from that, but evil will ultimately lose.
Good, right? Yeah. And so that corruption, I love that. I love that idea because I think that's what happens. You know, we're totally depraved. We are corrupted in all of our being. And when you act on that corruption, you further corrupt yourself. When you continue to lie, it becomes easier and easier to lie because you get this scar tissue on your soul, on your conscience. You know,
that's why God told Cain, "Sin is crouching at your door. It wants to master you, but you must master it. It wants to master you."
Yeah,
that's what sin does.
It's so good. I want to read that. Because Cain's getting angry. So in the course of time, Cain brought to the Lord an offering of the fruit of the ground, and Abel also brought of the firstborn of his flock and of their fat proteins. And some people, I think, like Sunday school lessons when I was growing up, they were saying it was because Cain brought fruit. Have you heard that? That's why he should have traded his fruit with Abel and then killed a ram or something, right? And it's like that system wasn't there yet.
Right. About
slaughtering.
It's more about which one was more valued.
Yeah. Well, I don't know if that's the case either. You know, Cain is a gardener. He's bringing.
But I'm saying.
Oh, okay.
Abel brought his choice meats.
Yeah.
Cain brought some. Cain brought sort of just the leftovers.
It doesn't really say. I don't think.
I think it's implied.
What was wrong with Cain's? Whatever it was, there was something wrong with it. He didn't do it in a noble way,
right?
And
he
God
knew
expected. Yeah, God expected him. It wasn't like an accident. Right. He knew what he was doing. He was holding back from God or something like that. And then the Lord had regard for Abel and his offering, but for Cain and his offering, he had no regard. So Cain was very angry, and his face fell. And I learned this in Hebrew, but I totally forgot. Like there's some really cool meaning there, but he was feeling down, I guess, and angry. The Lord said to Cain, "Why are you angry? Why is your face fallen? If you do well, will you not be accepted? And if you do not do well, sin is crouching at the door. Its desire is for you, but you must rule over it." And then he doesn't rule over it. He lets sin control him. He continues to act in the wrong manner, and his evil, sinful nature is continually solidified. And then it births an action of murder, the first murder ever.
Sin, when it is fully grown, gives birth to death. When it has conceived, gives birth to death. We see that all throughout Scripture.
So if we can bring it back to Peterson now.
Yeah, then we got to take these questions.
Let's talk about Peterson's solution.
Yes. Okay, good.
It goes right into it.
And it's right in the title of the chapter. Set your house in perfect order before you criticize the world.
Mhm.
This now it's funny timing because okay, to summarize what Peterson is saying is it's he's not saying anything. The stuff that he says right is not anything different than what Jesus himself says when he says, "You hypocrite, first take the plank out of your own eye,
Yeah.
then take the then you'll be able to see clearly to take the speck out of your neighbor's eye."
Yeah.
Or elsewhere when Jesus says, "No doubt you will quote the proverb to me, physician, heal thyself."
Mm-hmm.
The idea is deal with yourself first before you go on a campaign to fix what's wrong with everybody else.
Yeah.
And
And
dude,
that,
don't we see that
that
everywhere?
doesn't mean you don't want to go and fix stuff and you don't want
Thank you.
right, exactly. Of
Correct.
course. But if
Correct.
you have this giant plank in your eye and
You
you're trying
can't
to take a
see.
speck out of someone else's eye. So but if you do take the plank out of your own eye, a giant plank,
Mhm.
if you're able to do that, then of course you could take a speck out of someone. You're
Right.
an expert in that. I took a
Right.
plank out of my eye, dude.
Right.
I can help you with your speck.
All right. So look. So now this is very coincidental. So John Eaton says this. He says, related to the idea of putting your house in order, have either of you read The Household and the War for the Cosmos by C.R. Wiley? Highly recommend it. Have you read that book?
I haven't
Dude.
heard of it.
You know what's so funny? Okay, check this out. I got it right here.
Nice.
The
Did you read
Household.
it?
I read it a while ago. I actually drove up to Northwestern and I went into their beautiful old library, their Gothic,
yeah.
their neo-Gothic library, and I read it there all in one sitting for the most part. And the reason I say this is so coincidental, and I appreciate the question, is just last night with my Hammer and Anvil Society guys, Hammer and Anvil Society is a discipleship cohort leadership training that we're doing through the Think Institute. If you want to know more about it, email me at thethink.institute@gmail.com. Starting up again in January. But I was just talking with those guys about how there are three spheres. There are three spheres of government in every society: the state, the church, and the household. And if you want to impact, you want to have a broader, a deep impact for the gospel in society, that has to begin with the household. And so I actually referenced a lot of Chris Wiley's ideas in my training to my guys last night.
Nice.
And it was really, really cool. So yes, John Eaton, I have read that book. And I also would agree with this quote. Park, let me see what you think about this. Here's a quote from Teddy Roosevelt, John Eaton is sharing. Quote, "The life of the state rests and must ever rest upon the life of the family and the neighborhood." Teddy Roosevelt, April 10th, 1909. He says it's tangentially related, quote from Teddy Roosevelt, very insightful for many of our current social issues. In other words, you want to fix what's wrong with society? Clean your room, fix your household.
Well, dude, that's so good. And I think Peterson agrees with that. Peterson's starting with the individual first, right?
Mm-hmm.
With yourself. But he also talks about how that's going to help your family and that's going to help your relations at home. You start cleaning your room. You start avoiding what you know to be intentionally wrong. And then that has this ripple effect. And so, yeah, you can go out, and Peterson actually has in mind, I think here, the 2016 protests, right? And that's when Antifa started up, and he would always speak against the cultural Marxists and then the postmodern neo-Marxists and stuff like that.
In my
right?
head, there's a bell going off every time you say something triggering. Ding, neo-Marxist. Ding, Antifa. Ding. By the way, I know. Never mind. We'll talk
Okay.
offline.
All right.
We'll talk offline.
So that's what Peterson has in mind with this whole rule, because a lot of these people were going out and they're saying, "Hey, I want to end capitalism. I want to
Occupy Wall Street.
I want to go at the foundations of this society." And Peterson's like, "You can't even make your bed in the morning. What gives you any kind of insight into how society works? First, start by creating some order of your own chaos, and then you can be a little bit more equipped to do that."
To quote Mark Driscoll, "Who the H do you think you are?"
Yeah.
Had to censor myself while quoting that pastor.
Yeah. That kills
Okay.
it. But so
Look, go ahead.
yeah, starting with yourself. I think, dude, for us, obviously that applies to it immediately applies to the family, and all sorts of proverbs are going off in my head about, children are your arrows and you're releasing them out into the world.
Yeah.
Right. And how you see governments, when they become tyrannical, come for your kids, right? They want to re-educate your children. They want to
put
be
all your kids
father,
in government
right?
schools.
Yeah.
And
so
if you give your child to Caesar to raise him,
a
then
child of Caesar shall you have.
Right.
Something like that. Yeah. But so set your house in perfect order. People have criticized Peterson for this because it's like, well, that seems unattainable. And aren't you just really telling people not to be socially active? Because there's always something else that you can do in your own life, right?
John Eaton has I'm putting it up on the screen. It's blocking us right now. Maybe I can fix this here. Nope, that's worse. But so he's got this I think question ties into what you're just saying.
Yeah.
In light of the above quote and in line with the thesis of the book I referenced, yes, the C.R. Wiley book, what do you think of the idea that ordering your household is not only a prerequisite to changing the world, ordering your household is the very means by which positive change is possible in the world? Do you think that ties in with what you're saying or no?
I do. I think that's too strong. I think that you can certainly impact the world without having your own life in order. But dude, if the only way to change the world was to have a bunch of kids and then send those kids out, it would take a really long time. And maybe that's a good thing. Maybe that's more organic, right? Okay. But that shouldn't be the only thing. Yes, send out a bunch of kids. You're muted. Send out a bunch of kids for sure. But then also, be politically engaged and disciple young men. If you're a man and you're not discipling someone, you're a Christian, you're not discipling someone, you are messing up. Like, go out and make disciples. Make disciples
Who do you think
children.
you are?
Yeah. Encourage and shepherd your wife and help her look like a well-watered vine, for sure. But also vote, right? And some of you men, Christian men, are called to public office. And I hope it's not me, because that sounds like a terrible life.
No,
But
you're
you're
discipling the future statesmen. Can you imagine, bro, you're wrestlers? Dude, can you imagine them going into public office?
It'd be so great.
They'd be so great.
Yeah,
so
man.
Great.
Those guys are beasts.
Well, and this is one of the things that I'm trying to do with the Hammer and Anvil Society is there's guys, it's like, yes, we're united around this common cause of we're building the Think Institute on the one hand, but that's not the main thrust. The main thrust is these guys are getting trained and equipped to go back out to their places of business and commerce. And the idea is you change society from within. And I agree with you. I think it's too simplistic to say just have kids and train them. Did you see the Kevin DeYoung article that just came out?
No.
Kevin DeYoung just came out with this article. It was posted on Gospel Coalition, and it's sorry to say, but it's the first time I've been able to retweet something from the Gospel Coalition in a while. But
Kevin DeYoung's pretty solid, right?
Very solid.
I really like him. I haven't listened to him or followed him a couple of years, but
yeah,
I've always liked what I heard from him.
Same here. And but basically he makes this argument. He says, if you want to change the world, have a lot of kids, have more kids than you think you can handle, and catechize them all. And it's like, see, I agree with that. I think that's good. But here's the thing, that I agree with you. That's not the only thing to do, because as New Covenant Christians, not all of us are called to have large families, because the Great Commission is not merely be fruitful and multiply. Right. It's disciple the nations.
And oh man, Paul brings that back in Colossians. He talks about, so in Genesis 1, bear fruit and multiply. That's like, depending on what denomination you're in, that's a creation mandate, or that's just a man's original call, or whatever it is. But we're called to, Adam and Eve were called to multiply and grow and bear fruit. In Colossians, Paul describes the gospel as bearing fruit and multiplying. And the new creation, right? He uses creation language twice in chapter 1.
Yeah.
Bearing fruit and multiplying around the world.
Yeah. And doesn't he say in every nation?
Yeah. And then he says in you, in the Colossians as well, it's bearing fruit and multiplying in you. And so the Christian response is not just outbreed them, right? But it's spread this idea. We're a people of ideas. We're the people of, the word, of the book, of the gospel. And so that bears fruit and multiplies. And one way to do that is to have kids and catechize them and teach them and make them disciplers, right? You have 4 little disciplers, Lord willing, that are going to go and exponentially share the gospel. But then also when you're doing it yourself, dude, let's go. Let's make a bunch of, let's get You know, it's
Well, think about it. So, mom and dad had 4 kids. Okay, mom and dad are still out there making disciples.
right.
Right now, you've got our generation out there making disciples, and then the next generation after us is making disciples. Bro, think about that. You've got 2 people, sort of the matriarch, patriarch. Then you've got the next generation. Okay, there's 4 of us. We're all doing it. But now you've got, in this next generation, you've got our 4. You've got Gabe's 1. You've got Og and Phil's 1. You got, however, you're probably going to have 16.
Right.
Just because you try to always outdo me. But it's like, every layer that you go that you trace that out in over 100 years, 500 years. You build a civilization with that.
But and a problem with it is that people are still sinful, and a lot of our offspring,
Yes.
looking down the line, you're going to fall away. Maybe you start a cult, right?
No.
Like,
Not
dude, we got
possible.
cults in our lineage, man.
No, listen, we've got one guy, Rigdon, not the good Rigdon. This was the bad Rigdon. We've got a good Rigdon who signed the Bush River Declaration, which is a precursor to the Declaration of Independence. Our ancestor, bro, inspired the Declaration of Independence. Didn't that just make you want to just, when in the course of human events it becomes necessary to dissolve the bonds? What?
I thought you were going the slashing route. I thought that's where we were going.
No, you always want to go the slashing route. No, but we have one cultist.
So that's why we're people of idea, man. It's not just
right. It's not a genetic thing.
No.
Far from it.
Yeah.
Far from it. We're trying to smash that ideology.
Right.
It says it's all about genetics and all that.
Right.
Okay. So
Peterson's solution is going back to the self, and it's set your own house in perfect order. He said this in interviews that it's not. I don't know why he said perfect. Maybe it was intentional. Maybe it was a slip. Maybe he's talked about that more, and I haven't seen it. But
wow,
setting yourself, clean up your room. That's why he got famous. Clean up your room,
which flies in the face of what he said earlier in the book about maintaining the balance between chaos and order. Now he's literally saying, put your house in perfect order. He's not saying walk the line between order and chaos.
That's a good point. That's actually a good point.
He said so. I think Peterson gives away more here than I think you maybe intended to, but he wants to present this dualistic universe, order and chaos as 2 equal and opposite forces. But he betrays his true loyalties here, or his true understanding, because he understands order is normative. Good is normative. And that is a very Christian concept. Good is normative.
Yeah.
In fact, evil only has any meaning because it negates good.
Yeah.
So, okay, dude, there's one thing.
His solution summed up.
Thing we got to talk about here.
157, he says, start to stop. This is kind of awkward. Start to stop doing what you know to be wrong. Right. Start to stop doing what you know to be wrong. And from there, he kind of builds, he builds a utopian principle. If everyone stopped doing what they knew, if everyone started stopping what they knew to be wrong, what would the world look like? Maybe it would be this perfect world. And I guess if you do follow that through, I mean, you still have to deal with sin, right? But
Peterson is an anti-utopianist. And yet here he is saying, here's how we create a utopia.
Yeah.
Do you see? So as brilliant as he is, he's taken Christ and the true biblical worldview out, the heart of the biblical worldview. And what he's doing, and as a result, he's actually trapping himself in a contradiction.
Yeah.
And
well, and because he's got so much good stuff to say. Let me. This is a good quote too. So 158, he says, "If you cannot bring peace to your household, how dare you try to rule a city?" And that is a biblical principle. Looking at elders, if an elder can't rule his own household well,
right,
then why would he rule the church? And that's again going
1
back
Timothy
to
3, the requirements for elders.
Yeah, and ruling yourself first. Paul says, "I beat myself and make
my body." Yeah.
And he's like, I'm going at this war. I'm putting on armor of God. I'm putting to death my own body. And then he says for elders, they have to rule their household well, and then they're able to rule the church, right? And it spreads out in the spheres of sovereignty. But the next line Peterson says is, "Let your own soul guide you." It's like, but yeah, come on, dude. Like that's trash. There's a way that seems right to man, and in the end it leads to death.
Yes.
Your own soul is the problem.
Okay. This is the fatal flaw. This is the fatal flaw in this chapter. Tell me if you agree with this. Okay, wait a second. Let's take a few comments here because I think this needs to be the coup de grace at the end of the episode. So, okay, look at this. First of all, Jessica Dermody, this is an older comment. She says, not a coincidence. Not a coincidence that, that I happen to have this book. Somebody recommended it, right? Or maybe she's talking about, there was another coincidence earlier. I forget what it was. But no, you're right, Jessica. We affirm God is sovereignly in control here. Donna Flenke says the only reason we have any good in us is the Holy Spirit. The Spirit of God is the only thing that can combat the flesh. Okay, amen to that. Dude, here's the fatal flaw. And I think this ties in well with what Donna is saying. This whole idea of cleaning up your room, pursuing order, is about, establishing order in a chaotic world. He says on page 157, a hurricane is an act of God, but failure to prepare when the necessity for preparation is well known, that's sin. Mm-hmm. That's failure to hit the mark. And the wages of sin is death. Romans 6:23. Dude, okay, now, hear me on this. That's right before he goes into this run where he's talking about don't blame capitalism or the radical left or the iniquity of your enemies. Don't reorganize the state until you've ordered your own experience. In other words, get your own life together, bucko. But here's the problem. He talks about this sort of utopian climb that society might experience if we all clean up our rooms. But here's what he doesn't see. All this talk about heaven on earth is completely undercut by this fact. Everyone still dies. He has just said the wages of sin is death. The very fact that all we can do is establish order in this life until we die, which death is the inevitable consequence of all mankind. What that goes to show you, Park, is that the fundamental heart of what's wrong with us, the sin in our hearts, isn't eradicated by self-improvement that only aims at sort of a terrestrial goal. And what Ecclesiastes calls under the sun.
Yeah.
The problem is deeper than society. It goes down to the depth of our own hearts. And the outcome of our own sin is death. And unless we have a true way of eradicating that sin, all we'll be able to approximate is some sort of utopian society. But at the end of that, we all die anyway. Yeah. We need a solution that deals with our sin and that accomplishes immortality for us.
Well,
that obtains immortality for us.
The problem
that's Christ. That's the gospel.
The problem with Peterson is that he's reinterpreted sin. He's reinterpreted sin not to be a moral evil here, even though he talks about different moral evils. Right. I mean, you just read the quote. It's a failure to prepare when the necessity of preparation is well known. It's not preparing for the hurricane. It's not reinforcing the flood walls before the hurricane comes, right? That's a sin, and that obviously is the death. Look at all the death that comes. And so if we didn't do that, then there'd be less death. And his problem, the reason he's not addressing the sin issue and the death issue and the morality issue is because he's reinterpreted sin along naturalistic lines. Yeah, it's a sin. It's a missing the mark. And so I'm grabbing this verse and I'm eisegeting it. I'm taking it out of its context and I'm infusing it with my own meaning.
Right.
And that's not what sin is. And the problem that Peterson has, and this is why ultimately his treatment of the problem of evil is unsatisfying, is because his view of morality is unsatisfying. And I pulled this quote. So I wrote a paper last semester for Religion in the Modern World, and I read through Maps of Meaning, Jordan Peterson's more technical book. And he talked about, so he's talking about morality. And I want to just read this quote. He's talking about what morality is. Peterson says, identification of what constitutes the basis for establishing the nature of morality or the comparative value of objects is no simple matter. In fact, such judgment compromises the constant central demand of adaptation. No fixed answer solution to this problem can be offered. This question, the nature of the highest ideal or the nature of the highest good, because the environment posing the query, so to speak, constantly shifts as time progresses. That shift constitutes, in fact, time's progression. So the problem is he sees morality as constantly interacting with our environment, which is constantly changing. So as humans evolve throughout time, the environment makes different demands on us, and therefore our morality changes to match those new demands. He doesn't have an external perspective. He doesn't have a transcendent God that says do this and don't do that. And so he can't make sense of moral evil, which we call sin. And so he's got to reinterpret sin to be not preparing for disaster, right? Making it this really pragmatic thing. And so from a Christian perspective, no, dude, we can't go along with that. We can see a lot of the practical applications of, and we can find similar ideas in what we talked about for elders, qualification for elders, practical application. What Christ talked about, the plank in your eye, absolutely we can affirm that. But Peterson can affirm that insofar as being inconsistent with his own worldview.
Right. And that's, I mean, if he were here, this is what I'd say. Like, look, the wages of sin is death, but and the line between good and evil really does run through the human heart. And it's because of that fact that we need a heart transplant, a spiritual, obviously not a literal one, a spiritual heart transplant. And that is not something we can give ourselves. But thankfully, God in Scripture says, he prophesies in the Old Testament, I will take out your heart of stone and give you a heart of flesh. Whereas before we had the law written on stone tablets, now the law is written in a living, breathing way, spiritual way upon our hearts. But that comes, just like what Donna was saying earlier, that comes from the indwelling of the Holy Spirit, who transforms us from within the inside. You can draw then a line between a transformed heart, straight out into a transformed household, straight out into a transformed church, and out into a transformed world or society or state. And so as always, lots of good stuff there to affirm, and lots of unfortunately some inconsistencies to address.
Some bones to spit. What does it gain a man if he sets his whole life in order but loses his very soul?
Bro, solid. Okay, good. Okay, Park, how can people get in touch with you?
Check me out at parkersetacase.com for a lot of my blog posts. You can find that paper that I was talking about on my blog post. It's called Mapping Peterson's Meaning.
Which one did you send to me? You said read this, and I haven't read it yet.
It wasn't that one. That was about the golden triangle of freedom.
Oh, yeah. Send that to me again, would you?
Yeah.
Just keep sending it and sending it.
This is good. This is like the end of Paul's letters where he says, bring the books and a bunch of random stuff.
Yeah, that's right.
And my coat. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Good. Well, listen, this is not goodbye. This has just been a little pit stop along the way of your spiritual journey. If you haven't bought this book yet, 12 Rules for Life, if you have no idea what we're talking about and you're like, this sounds fascinating. This sounds interesting. We're going through all 12 rules. Read a chapter, go back. You can rewatch these episodes. We're going to get a fully updated playlist on YouTube, which, by the way, if you're watching on YouTube and you have not subscribed yet, my friend, Ethan Michael, my atheist friend, or he says he's an atheist. We know that there is no such thing as a true atheist, Ethan. He says, Joel, you're only look at that profile picture, dude. Doesn't that just, that's just great.
It's friendly.
Very friendly. Joel, you're only 14 subs away from a custom channel URL. And then he says, now 13, just 13 people. So listen, if you're watching on YouTube and you haven't subscribed yet, please subscribe to our channel. Why? Because all kinds of goodness and blessing will flow to us if you subscribe. No, we're trying to get the word out about this content. At the end of the day, we want to help equip Christians to explain, share, and defend the biblical worldview. We want to help them arise from their primordial lobster state into an evolved state where they have they
can clean up their rooms because they have hands now, and
both of their eye stalks are functioning. Not being clipped off by their enemies. There's probably something coherent in there.
Yeah.
All right. Jessica Dermody does say that's what I was talking about. Okay, good. So yes. So God does work in some incredible ways. John Eaton, thank you for watching. He says he appreciates the conversation, and he put in something about Jordan Peterson making a good point about introducing beauty. Man, there's a lot to cover here. Go back, read the book, and feel free to interact with Parker or me on social media. We're there. If you're listening later on the podcast, which I need to update, but if you're watching, give us an honest 5-star rating and review, an honest one, because tell the truth, or at least don't lie. We're going to get to that one pretty soon.
This is starting to sound like Ben Shapiro's advertising. Are you going to start talking about Birch Gold Group soon?
Yes. And what's his VPN? Express VPN.
I don't know. I try not to get that in my brain because that means they're being very successful at marketing.
Oh, it's in there. It's in there. The Cash App. All right.
Stop.
All right. So that's all we have for you. Until next time. Until next time.
Hope out of your eye.
Oh yeah. Until next time. Hope it ruled your city. Hope it gave you the.
Hope it helped you take the lobster claw out of your own eye stalk.
So you could
so you can go and pinch
the eye stalk of your neighbor.
That's good. All right, man.
All right, goodbye.